It's week one of the NFL season. Which players are the value plays and which ones are the traps? We'll tell you which guys are going to be high owned this week, which ones you should avoid, and which ones you should play. I'm Austin Lee, and I'm joined, as always, by Devin Knotts, Ryan Hester, and John Lee. We're going to get right into it. We're covering the main slate for week one. And John, tell us, Vegas sometimes is a crystal ball into what might happen for the week. What is the Vegas crystal ball telling us for the picks this week?
Week one is going to have some unique situations. So we'll talk a little bit about some of this, in the next segment. But when we're looking at Vegas odds in week one, I think we put a little less confidence in those odds based on what we might do in weeks 4 through 17. But nonetheless, it's worth covering them. New England and New Orleans, both big favorites, both at the top of the list this week. Both slated to score nearly 30 points against Tampa Bay and Houston, respectively. So you're going to see a lot of guys from those teams. We'll be talking about them extensively tonight. And then there's a drop down. After that, we're looking at Minnesota. They're hosting San Francisco. Got a new offense. Got Dalvin Cook back. A lot of excitement there in Minnesota bringing Kirk Cousins this year. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And then the Chargers in Kansas City is an interesting game. 47.5 is the current total on that. This is a game that I think could shoot out. You've got two high-powered offenses. Devin's already talked about the weaknesses there in the pre-show of the Power Grid about how bad the Kansas City defenders are. This is a pretty interesting game, and so we'll talk more about it as well. As far as defenses, I think Baltimore is shining this week. We'll talk about them, but they're going up against Buffalo. They're hosting Buffalo, who's bringing back Nathan Peterman this week, who you'll remember last year threw 5 picks in one game. Baltimore is hosting them with a revamped defense, and Buffalo comes in at the bottom of the Vegas value chart this week with 16.8 implied points.
Yeah, Peterman got those 5 picks in a half of football. Nathan 5-pick Peterman, as I call him.
Bet the Bengals, please, everyone, +3.
Yep.
The Colts are horrible.
Then at Football Guys, we're going to have some sports wagering content on our DFS site, so be on the lookout for that. And we'll give you a few ideas for where to go with that as we go through our typical FanDuel and DraftKings style picks. Let's talk a little bit about week one. It's a little bit unique compared to some of the other weeks. The sites release pricing way in advance, which creates some values, although this year it doesn't feel like there's quite as many crazy values as there usually is in week one. Devin, what are you seeing in terms of pricing overall, and what advice do you have for week one?
The pricing seems okay this year. It's largely because the injuries that we've seen, there isn't a clear guy to back up. So Darius Geis and Jerick McKinnon, there isn't that, cheap running back who's going to get 20 touches. Maybe Alfred Morris does, but we'll get into that in a minute. But I think the pricing's pretty solid, actually. Now, this could all be thrown off if Le'Veon Bell is out or some other thing that we'll get into. But recording this on Monday night, the pricing seems the best it's been.
Yeah, this is one of the best week one pricings I've seen in a while. We lost Devin there for a second. But like Devin said, we're recording on Monday night, and Le'Veon Bell did not report to practice today on Monday. I have a hunch this is going to be very clear before we get to the games and you have to make your picks. But we should sort of make a call for both scenarios, one where Bell shows up and one where he doesn't, because I think it's going to be pretty obvious by the time the games go. Ryan, I'll pitch it to you. What sort of general strategy advice do you have for week one?
So I'm a kind of a have to see it to believe it guy, especially when it comes, from week to week. If you're talking season-long fantasy, you might want to be a year early on some players to get ahead of the game. But week one, if there's a guy on a new team, I'm very skeptical. So I try to keep it to situations I know, which I think will kind of go hand in hand with some of the other guys' strategy. I remember week one last year we talked about don't blow your bankroll. I know we're all excited it's football season, But hand in hand with go with what you know is not taking too much risk. So both with player selection and with your bankroll and your strategy and your mix of games that you're playing. So that's my general thing is I just want to see a week, get some data points, and then maybe expand my horizon, so to speak, in the rest of September.
Yeah, John, I think bankroll management is a key point to make for week one. How would you treat this differently than, say, week 6 in terms of how you're spending in cash games and GPPs?
Yeah, I mean, I think typically week one, my distribution is slanted more towards GPPs than cash games, because I think there's the bigger edge to be had this week. The first few weeks is in GPPs. That's just my opinion. It's based on the premise that we're working on limited knowledge. There are a lot of biases coming into this season based on last season, and we'll talk tonight. You know, we have new coaching systems in place. We have new teams, new players working together, a lot of unknowns, and decisions will be made in cash games based on what we think we know. And I don't always think that's prudent early in the season. And so this week I will have a much higher distribution of my bankroll towards GPPs than I will cash games. And then I will, as the season progresses and we learn more, I will move that more skewed towards cash games.
Yeah, I think in the first couple of weeks you get more new players playing as well. And so I'm not against the idea of playing cash games, but I agree that skewing your money a little heavier towards GPP than you would in a later week is the way to go. Let's talk about some quarterbacks. Really the only note I have on here in terms of like injuries or outages is that Jameis Winston is out for the first 3 games. That's not a surprise. The suspension that was announced well in the offseason. We got Ryan Fitzpatrick playing in his place. Devin, who are your quarterbacks you like? Yeah, I mean the answer is no. I mean that helps. That helps the Saints defense really is what that does. Yeah. We're not looking to play Ryan Fitzpatrick, right?
I mean, he is the top guy in our IBC, so I shouldn't say no, but I'm not doing it. I'm a cheap side of things. I'd rather go Tyrod Taylor, but honestly, or Blake Bortles, who I'll start with. The Giants secondary continues to be a mess. Bortles showed in the postseason that he's going to run the ball, and I don't know if it's going to continue, but if it does, I mean, he's a guy who don't watch the game. I mean, just don't even try to watch the game. But he's a guy who consistently puts up fantasy points that are better than everyone expects. Everyone hates the guy. I'm a huge fan, as I think a lot of people know, but he's a guy I'm looking at. The other one is Ben Roethlisberger, who just tears up Cleveland. We'll get into the stacks in a minute, but him and Brown are my favorite stack of the week. And then the last guy that I have on my list is Andy Dalton, actually. So the Colts secondary is not good. Pierre Desir, I think his name has been cut 5 times and is their number one. I think he's their number 1 corner. So Andy Dalton should have a pretty good game indoors. I already said to bet the Bengals. So those are the 3 that I'm really looking at.
Nice. Ryan, I saw you kind of a little iffy on the Steelers picks there. You're a Steelers fan. Are you buying into the home road splits for Ben? I mean, this is a game on the road.
Yeah, and for the record, it's not a Ben Roethlisberger thing. He's the one that produces the fantasy points. I'm of the mind that it's a Mike Tomlin thing. He doesn't think that teams can pass on the road. I don't know why, but I could go on for an hour about that, so we'll skip it. The only reason I kind of made the face is that, Roethlisberger does typically do well against Cleveland, but, last year in that week 1 game, it was pretty spotty. I know he had a couple of touchdowns, but it wasn't anything to write home about. So I think there's better options, especially for the price, and I think you can go cheaper and get more points. I do agree with the Dalton call, and just moving on, another guy that I like, we alluded to the potential AFC West shootout. I like Phillip Rivers as well, and as for cash games. He might even be the most expensive I would even contemplate going in cash games this week.
No, I think we're going to see a lot of ownership on Tom Brady and sort of like the name brand quarterbacks this week, especially with people maybe finding more value at the receiver and tight end position. John, who do you like at quarterback this week?
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that nobody mentioned the quarterback that I think is the shoe-in to be the number one most owned quarterback this week, and that's Drew Brees. He's 6,800. His running game consists of a guy who can catch touchdown passes, so there's a very strong possibility that he could end up with 4 touchdown passes, even if 2 of them are dump-offs to Alvin Kamara. So I think if you're spending up at the quarterback position this week, for cash games, Drew Brees is the guy. I, on the other hand, made a few cash game lineups earlier today. Now it's Monday. This is subject to change. And I was salary saving at the quarterback position for my cash games. As you pointed out at the top of the show, there isn't a lot of value this week. Traditionally, in week 1, we have a number of injuries that have created value, but there really hasn't been a lot of value created through injuries, which is good. I'm glad for that. But at the lower end, the 2 guys that I like one more than the other. Tyrod Taylor, not Tyrod apparently. Tyrod, I like him against the Steelers, 5,400. He can gather some points with his legs. He has probably the best offensive weapons he's had in years there in Cleveland. And I don't think he's going up against a very good defense, but I'm just trying to tilt Ryan as I say that. And then the other guy that I think, you guys didn't like him at the top, but I think Ryan Fitzpatrick could feasibly be a guy that you could go with. He's $5,000, guys. What's he have to do? I knew we were going to get into a debate. And
Blake Bortles is 600 more.
Why? Joe Flacco is 100 less. Why would we not play Joe Flacco at home as a favorite against a horrible Buffalo team? I mean, if we're playing Ryan Fitzpatrick, why would we not just play Joe Flacco?
Because Joe Flacco is he's a 7-point favorite.
You're not playing Ryan Fitzpatrick either.
Well, listen, you asked me a question, and let me answer it.
I was talking to Devin.
You got a guy, Joe Flacco, who's playing as a 7-point home favorite. All they're going to do is feed Alex Collins all day. In the other case, you got Ryan Fitzpatrick, who could be losing by 2 touchdowns by the end of the first quarter. They're going to have to abandon the run. The guy could end up throwing the ball 40 times. I don't care if he throws 3 picks. If he throws the ball 40 times, he's going to end up with 15 points, and that's all you're asking for with a $5,000 quarterback.
There are a lot of studies that show that being a home favorite is actually better for quarterbacks than relying on garbage time is for quarterbacks. What if garbage time never comes? Then you're just relying on Ryan Fitzpatrick to be there.
Case Keenum at 5,100 is a better play.
Agreed. He's a better play than Fitzpatrick and maybe even Flacco.
Don't start Flacco. Can I agree this is the last time we talk about Flacco on the show all season?
If we're 5,000 or under, I'm starting Flacco. If we have to be 5,000 or under. That's the only stipulation, if we have to be.
I love this. So if you're going cheap, you've got some options there. We definitely do not agree on what the cheap option is here.
The one thing I want to add is John said that he thinks Brees will be the highest owned guy. I think it'll be Deshaun Watson. He's 2 underpriced compared to where he's going in season long. So he's 6,700 on the road against New England in the highest over-under game on the slate. I think that a lot of people are going to go to him. I don't think it's the right move, but I think that he's going to draw the most ownership.
He'll definitely draw a lot of ownership. I think we'll see a lot of ownership with Tom Brady too, even though he's like the highest priced one. People feel that nice warm security blanket going with Tom Brady. Let's move on to the next position, guys. But first, I want to tell you guys about a new deal we have over at footballguys.com. If you have never played at FanDuel, and I know that limits this, but if you've never played at FanDuel, go to fanduel.com/FBG. You can get our Football Guys All-Pro subscription. That's our top subscription that usually costs $60. You can get that by depositing $5 at FanDuel. So instead of paying $60, you can pay $5. So that's a great deal for those of you who have never played at FanDuel. Give that a try. FanDuel.com/FBG. All right, let's talk about running backs. And we mentioned it at the top of the show. The biggest question mark here is Le'Veon Bell missing practice on Monday. So I think we should have a scenario for where he plays and where he doesn't, because we're going to have clarity on this by the end of the week. I'll pitch it to you, Ryan. You're the resident Steelers fan here. If Bell misses, how do you feel about James Conner?
Starting him automatically, especially in cash games. He's too cheap. In the Steelers' third preseason game, they ran. I think he had 6 catches. They ran a number of plays where he was running Le'Veon Bell type routes. He wasn't doing it as well or looking as good, but they made it a point to play the game as though he kind of was Le'Veon Bell. And right now, I'm trying to pull it up on the fly here, but I'm seeing our guys, Marl Tremblay and David, have Bell projected for 21 points. I mean, Connor I wouldn't project him for that, but if you can project 14 or 15, I think he's worth playing. Again, guys, help me real quick. I'm on the fly here with his salary. I looked earlier today, 4,500.
Yeah, it's only 4,500.
4,500. So I think he gets to 3x at 4,500 if Le'Veon Bell's not playing. So I think he's a play in cash, and he gives you the relief we talked about. There's not a lot of value. I think he'll be very high owned at that point. But again, cash games, I think he's worth it. So I'm playing him, and I'm not playing Le'Veon Bell if he does play.
Yeah, it seems like there's some other solid high price options, and Bell is the highest, it looks like, on both sites here, if I'm correct. So, John, you kind of seemed iffy on Connor there. Is that because you're finding value elsewhere? What's your take on this?
It's just that I think this week's tricky. If I'm spending up anywhere, that I'm looking at my list, I'm really spending up at the running back position because I feel that's where I can be most confident in putting my dollars in. And I'm not suggesting that Connor would not be a cash game play if Bell was named inactive, but I think we're going to get in the middle here. And like we did last year, where Bell will eventually show up, Bell will play, but Bell probably will not get a full bevy of carries or touches or snaps. And then we end up in the middle. And so then people are going to be asking themselves, what do I do now? And if that does happen, I think you fade both of those guys based on what we've seen historically, and spend your money where you know it's going to be spent well.
But my answer was based on the question of if Le'Veon Bell does not report.
Yep.
All right.
So I think it was
they're both playing. Forget it.
I don't disagree with it. I just if I'm going to spend $4,500 on a player, it's probably going to be on a tight end or a wide receiver this week, so that I can spend up at running back because I like Alvin Kamara, I like Zeke Elliott, I like Christian McCaffrey. All of those guys are going to be where I spend my money.
Mm.
So
Devin, what do you like?
Carlos Hyde, Royce Freeman, Peyton Barber, to me, are all better plays than James Conner, even if Bell is out.
So Ryan disagrees. So, hey, for those of you watching the audio version or new to the show, we hold up these Black Eyed Joe signs. Green means you agree with the pick. Red means you disagree with the pick. If you're listening to the audio version, check that out on the video version on our YouTube channel. Ryan disagrees. He likes James Conner better than at least one of those plays. What do you got, Ryan?
So Royce Freeman, we got a report today or yesterday that he might be named the starter soon.
Okay, he was named the starter.
We don't know. Okay, sorry. We don't know that they're going to blow out Seattle and give him a ton of action. Hyde's the only one that I partially agree with you on because he does have a job right now. I'm sorry. Who was the third guy you said there, Devin?
Peyton Barber.
Peyton Barber. They're a touchdown or more underdog on the road. I mean, I don't know. It's hard for me to get on board with that. We've got James Conner. If Le'Veon Bell doesn't play, he's the unquestioned starter on a team that's favored and supposed to score a lot of points. The only reason I wouldn't start him is if I were starting Antonio Brown and/or Ben Roethlisberger and just was worried about having too many Steelers in the line.
I mean, Antonio Brown's a must-play if Bell's out. I mean, there's no doubt that what worries me is Cleveland's defense. I mean, last year was the second-best defense against the run. They lost Danny Shelton, which we could debate whether or not he was a big factor in that. I think he was a partial factor in that. But the defense is pretty good.
But 4 catches, 40 yards, and 40 rushing yards, and we're almost at 3 hex already. I mean, he doesn't have to even do that much. And if it's cash game, I said, so why wouldn't you could start receiver running back on the same team in a cash game.
Fair. I prefer those other guys, but we're not – let's move on.
Okay. Yeah, we can move on. And it may be that Bell shows up here and it becomes a moot point. Let's talk about some of these other injuries and absences. We mentioned it briefly. Jerick McKinnon is on IR. Darius Geis is on IR. But we're not necessarily – anyone let's see the Black Eyed Joe sign. Anyone buying into Alfred Morris, Adrian Peterson, or any running backs who might play because those two guys are out. All right, so what do you got, Devin?
I mean, did we forget Alfred Morris in the Shanahan offense? I mean, he was tremendous. And yes, the matchup is difficult. I get it, against Minnesota. So that he's a GPP play, but he's 3,600. So if he scores a touchdown or two, why not?
Yeah, and Matt Breida might be the longer-term answer there, but he has had a shoulder injury. It looks like he may play in this game, but it seems like Alfred Morris is going to be the lead back for this
Can we
team.
talk about the top-end guys?
Yeah, let's talk about the top-end guys. Which ones do you like?
I mean, Alvin Kamara is going to be the most popular.
Yes.
Going against the Tampa Bay defense, who has not been great against the run. Their linebacking core continues to be a problem. Mark Ingram is suspended. There's a lot of debate, I know, internally at Footballguys regarding whether his volume is sustainable and whether he can have 6.1 yards per carry. The answer is no, he can't have 6.1 yards per carry, but he doesn't need it with Mark Ingram out. So I think that, realistically, he's a guy who's going to get 20, 25 touches in this game, which he didn't have last year, as the Saints are going to get out to an early lead and run the ball for quite a bit of the game. It's so he's my top guy.
Yeah, I think it's going to be.
The other two guys that are simply too cheap on FanDuel are Saquon Barkley and Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook going against San Francisco. He's been injured, so neither of these guys may be healthy. But at 7,600 and 7,300, they're too talented for the matchups, going against Jacksonville, who is much better against the pass, and San Francisco, like I said, who has not been great against the run.
And I was going to ask you guys if there's concern about Barkley or Cook because they didn't play a whole lot in the preseason, kind of battling injuries. It sounds like they're going to play, but they're not coming in sort of like full strength here. So I'd be cautious about that at least. Maybe shift them more on the GPP side than thinking about them for cash games. Any interest? Let's see the Black-Eyed Joe signs here. Any interest in a New England running back for GPPs this week at all? All right, but Devin's says red. The other guys say green. John, tell me about the New England backfield.
Well, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen, but they're all cheap. You've got James White, I think, is $4K. Rex Burkhead is $4,200. And we would be remiss not to talk about the wide receiving core with Edelman suspended. Your number one receiver is Chris Hogan, and that's probably not true. The number one receiver is Gronkowski.
Sure.
At 6,900, who's basically a wide receiver you can get at a discount. But Chris Hogan, and then after that we're talking Philip Dorsett and Cordarrelle Patterson, of all people, I think is the wide receiver 3. So you could see Belichick working a guy like Burkhead out of the slots, giving him some goal line action. I think Burkhead is the guy this week that I'm most interested in. At 4,200, I'll have a piece of him in GPPs. He's certainly not a cash game play, but he has 2 touchdown upside at a very fair price point.
The last injury I have on my list is that Marlon Mack is questionable, the hamstring injury. Black-Eyed Joe signs. Any interest in trying to figure out the Colts backfield there and play someone like Jordan Wilkins out there? I'm getting red signs. Oh, Devin revealed a secret to us before the show. He told us that he does not have a green Black-Eyed Joe sign.
I actually found one, so I did post one earlier.
Okay, gotcha. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. All he ever does is flash up the red Black-Eyed Joe sign. But he gave the thumbs up. Tell us why you might be interested in the Colts backfield.
Because even though I want to bet the Bengals, and I'm going to bet the Bengals, they're home favorites. So if they get out to an early lead, Wilkins is going to be the guy who's going to get a majority of the carries. So Marlon Mack doesn't look like he's ready. Nyheim Hines, I think his name is not a running back who you can trust every down. I think realistically Jordan Wilkins could get 16, 17 carries in this game, which at the price point that he's at, why not? He's 3,700 on DraftKings. He's 5,100 on FanDuel. So if you're trying to go cheap, he's a guy who's going to get touches at a pretty big discount, and you can load up at other positions. So if you're going to start Tom Brady, if you're going to start Antonio Brown, if you're going to load up on these other positions, Wilkins is a guy who's going to get cheap touches, and ultimately that's what I'm looking for if I'm going to diversify that way.
Right on. Let's move on to wide receivers. If you want to check out our daily fantasy content, be sure to go over to footballguys.com/DFS. We update our landing page throughout the week to add tons of features there. So check us out over there. Wide receivers. John, I'm going to pitch this to you first. I would say the biggest injury on this list is probably Marquise Lee. He's on IR. People are talking about Keelan Cole here. Are you buying the Keelan Cole hype?
For cash games, I definitely will have Keelan Cole at 3,800. I do think that he could be the most widely owned player in DFS on DraftKings this week, simply because he'll be touted. We're doing it right now, or at least I am. And I didn't see any red black-eyed Joes going up, so I guess that means you guys are in favor as well. I think he's the number one owned guy this week. I suspect he'll be 30% or more owned in tournaments. So you could make a case for getting away from him in GPPs, but I think in cash games, you got to have him, because if he ends up with 4 or 5 catches, which almost seems like a certainty against the Giants, he probably reaches value. Outside of him, I really want Antonio Brown this week. He's 8,600. I think he's fairly priced. I want him in most formats, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Steelers' passing offense and why I like it maybe a bit later. And outside of those guys, I think for cash games, maybe Chris Hogan, 6,100, wide receiver 1 for the offense that is projected to score the most points all week. I want a piece of that if I can afford it. But again, I told you I'm spending up at the running back position this week, so it really comes down to roster construction where that's concerned. I'll throw out one GPP before you hand it off. This week, I think Adam Thielen is a guy that I like. He'll go up against San Francisco. He'll match up against Quan Williams, and Quan Williams gives up.
You're not concerned about the leg?
I'm not. He's practicing, and at some point I was a little afraid of that, but I think he's 100%. Now, if it turns out late in the week he's not practicing, I rescind some of this, and this is part of the danger of doing a show on a Monday. But the last I've heard, he was practicing again. So, assuming he's 100%, I love him against Quan Williams, who is a very burnable cornerback who also gives up 5 inches to him inside the red zone. I think Thielen scores a touchdown this weekend.
Nice. Devin, you're the resident Browns fan. We're hearing that Josh Gordon is not starting this week. Instead, it's going to be Antonio Callaway. Does this impact your position on the Cleveland receivers? And who else you got at wide receiver?
I'm not touching Cleveland this week.
We have 2 very realistic fans on the show. I'll let you know. Ryan is generally realistic about his Steelers, and Devin is very realistic about his Browns. So I like to get their insights.
If they get behind, the guy I'd go with is Rashard Higgins, just because he's looked really good in preseason. We mentioned Antonio Brown. I mentioned AJ Green earlier against Pierre Desir. The guy that I really like, believe it or not, is Tyreek Hill, going against a pretty good Chargers secondary. So he didn't draw Casey Hayward in either of their first 2 matchups last year. And he had 88 yards and a touchdown and 77 yards and a touchdown in their 2 matchups last season. So he's a guy that I'm looking at. I think that Patrick Mahomes fits him perfectly. And he's one of my favorite targets this week. The other guy that I'm looking at potentially is sorry, I just lost it. DeAndre Hopkins. I just think that, if you think that New England is going to get out in front, like I think that Vegas believes that it will, Hopkins should see quite a bit of targets this week.
Yeah, I don't necessarily buy the narrative that New England's going to shut down the biggest weapon. I think that at a certain point, when you've got a receiver like that and your team's probably going to be playing that far from behind, he's going to get a ton of targets in this game.
I think they're going to I don't think they're going to let Will Fuller beat them. I think they're going to shut down the big play and that from happening. So what we've seen New England do in the past is double team the deep threat, go one-on-one with the number one receiver, and basically say, don't beat us deep. So if you want to dink and dunk on the field all day, fine, but don't beat us with the 70-yard, 60-yard, 50-yard touchdown with Fuller. So I'm off Fuller, but I'm looking at Hopkins.
I like that. That's a good explanation. Two other injuries I have on my list that I'll pitch to you, Ryan. I've got Devontae Parker with a finger injury. Maybe that opens up some potential value or a GPP play for like Kenny Stills or Danny Amendola. Also, Doug Baldwin has come out to say that he's not 100%. He's going to play, but his knee isn't in great shape. That whole Seattle offense sounds like it's really hurting, and it's not good to come into week one hurting as much as they are. Does any of that news create plays for you, or do you have some other guys you're looking at?
In Seattle, no. And sorry to the listeners if they just heard me typing. Thought I was on mute. But I was typing a note about Kenny Stills, as a matter of fact. So you mentioned Devontae Parker. Injured or not, Kenny Stills is better than Devontae Parker. So I just, there was a video maybe a week or two ago where one of Tennessee's DBs coaches, an older gentleman, middle-aged, may I say?
Kerry Combs. Kerry Combs, who was the cornerback coach for Ohio State last year.
Okay, was beating one of their corners for a touchdown in practice. So Tennessee's secondary was bad last year, and in very limited sample size, albeit they look pretty bad this year too. So I'm going to believe they're bad until they prove to me that they're not. And we've seen Kenny Stills do things at all levels of the field, including deep. So he's 4,700. It's not too huge of a price to pay. So if I have to pick a Miami receiver, he's the one. I guess the other guy that we haven't really mentioned that I kind of like, we talked about the game being a shootout, but Keenan Allen is, he's reasonably priced. He's not priced at the highest of the position, but the guy's going to get his targets. We saw him last year have a monster stretch where he did start scoring touchdowns, and we think that's going to be a shootout game. So I kind of like him in any format as well this week. So he's a guy that I'm looking at that I just didn't hear mentioned, so wanted to bring him up.
Another guy that we didn't mention, John, I'm going to pitch this to you because you're the ODB whisperer. He's got a really tough matchup this week against Jacksonville. Is he a GPP play?
I'll have very, very little OBJ this week, and it's mostly because he'll get shadow coverage from Jalen Ramsey, who I think has evolved into the best cornerback in the league. And OBJ has proven over the years that when he has shadow coverage by somebody who's good, Josh Norman comes to mind, he can't handle it. He gets played out of his mind, and I think this is not a good spot for him. You add in questions about Eli Manning, questions about that offensive line, and then the somewhat elevated salary. They tried to entice you with $7,000 this week, which is
exactly
super high. But I think I'm staying away. I just don't have the belief that all of those things can be overcome. But I'll probably have 5% or something.
Yeah, something on the smaller side. Let's talk about tight ends. Let's see, Ryan, I'll pitch this to you first to talk about tight ends. We've got Hunter Henry, who's on IR. We've known this for a while. We suspected that the Chargers would go out and sign Antonio Gates, basically giving him the offseason off so he could rest. So a big red black-eyed Joe from Ryan on considering the low-cost Antonio Gates there.
Why?
What, he just has to score like a touchdown or two, right?
I mean, I don't even know if he's on the slate, to be honest. But
that's a good question. He may not be because he was signed so late So watch out for that.
Because I haven't looked for him.
He is. He's 2,600.
I'm not paying for 4 targets and 39 total air yards.
But in a GPP, if he scores a touchdown,
this
that's
is a position
10
where you just punt this week, right? Can we agree on that? In cash games, you just punt this position, or are you paying up for Gronkowski and really taking a chance elsewhere?
No, not in cash. Not in cash. No, to me, if you're punting in cash, I mean, it's we're gonna do it every week. So let's bring up the guy playing against the Giants. Austin Seferian-Jenkins is 3,200 on a team that just lost probably its leading target receiver. So let's just throw out the athletic guy facing the Giants who Alec Ogletree can't cover if you're going to punt. I mean, I also like Jack Doyle against who are they play? Sorry, I just lost it. Against Cincy. Last time he played Cincy last year, he threw up 12 for 121 in the touchdown. So he's only 3,600. More of a GPP play because they do have Eric Ebron in the fold, and we don't know how that game's going to go. I mean, certainly Devin has been on both sides of it already on this show. So he's the guy GPP only that I like, but I would start Safarian-Jenkins in cash. He only needs a little bit. So
Devin threw up the red black eyed Joe for Austin Safarian-Jenkins. He has a thing against people named Austin. Tell me more, Devin.
How many times are we going to go to Austin Safarian-Jenkins and meet Brian? I mean, realistically, I understand the Giants. I get that piece. 3,200, fine. Tyler Eifert's 3,400. Jordan Reed's 4,000. These are top 6 talents, top 7 talents when they're healthy. I mean, realistically, those two are the guys that are, when they're healthy, they're just simply too cheap.
4,000, but 4,000 is not in the same price range as 3,200.
For $800, I'll punt on defense. I'll find Jordan Reed he's a much better play simply because he's so much more talented. He has Alex Smith throwing to him, and Alex Smith, we saw what he did with Travis Kelce. I mean, Alex Smith throws to his tight ends. It's Reed or it's Eifert. I'll have 0 Safarian-Jenkins. He's going to be overowned, severely overowned, and he's just not a guy I'm targeting.
So John, break the tie on ASJ here.
Before I do, who's your cash game play then on DraftKings for tight end? Yes.
Jordan Reed.
Jordan Reed at 4,000. So I'll break the tie and say that I'm with Ryan on this one. I think ASJ is the play, and not because I have a lot of confidence in ASJ, but I do have some confidence that the Giants can't cover the position, and the $800, believe it or not, actually does come into favor when I'm starting to think about filling out other places on my roster. And Antonio Gates at 2,600. I'm not a big fan of Antonio Gates. I think he's going to have a terrible season. But if he catches 2 or 3 passes and finishes with 6 fantasy points, I'm okay with that as long as I can save the salary and use it elsewhere. So for the same reasons Ryan doesn't like the Jordan Reed call, I could make the contrary argument to that's why you want to have Antonio Gates. But I think in the middle is a good mixture, and I'll go with ASJ as well.
All right, so
IVCs are on my side, so we're back to a tie. Can we talk about Cameron Brate real quick?
Sure, do it, man.
Like Cameron Brate, we've seen at 3,000, they signed him to a huge deal. He's had some big games with Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I'm looking at this Cardinals game last year, pretty early in the season. He had 6 for 76 and a touchdown. I think he's a guy that he's going against New Orleans and going against those tough corners. We've seen Marshawn Lattimore shut down Mike Evans. Who else are they going to throw to?
Godwin.
They're going to be down.
Any concern about O.J. Howard there? I mean, he's probably going to be is he going to be the more popular tight end play in Tampa Bay?
That's the issue.
After the contract they signed to Brate,
weren't we all surprised at that signing? Of Brate? I mean, that in the context of drafting O.J. Howard so highly and saying he was the tight end of the future, and then they gave Brate all this money, it made you think, wait, what are they thinking? And they're obviously thinking something. So the question then becomes, which tight end are they going to throw to? And from my perspective, I think for another, it's about $1,000, but in GPPs, the salary is not such a big thing. I'd rather have Chris Godwin as a GPP dart. For the same reasons that Devin just outlined. Mike Evans is going to have Fitz with Marcus Lattimore in shadow coverage, and Godwin has
Marshawn Lattimore.
What did I say? Sorry,
Marcus Lattimore.
Yeah, my bad, Marshawn.
His knees are not good.
He's making a comeback, I tell you.
No.
Godwin has had an excellent camp. He's at a stage in his career where we typically see wide receivers making solid evolution into good hands and route running and that kind of thing. At 4,100, I think you could do worse in GPPs.
All right, so at the top of our IVCs, no one's really mentioned Travis Kelce here. I think a lot of people are going to be on Gronkowski this week. Is Kelce a reasonable GPP pivot off of spending up here? I mean,
Sure.
He's got upside, right?
Yeah. Any player that has 2 touchdown upside is always in GPP contention. Always.
Yeah.
And both of those guys are good GPP plays simply because the masses are going to go to the cheaper tight end and pay up at other positions. So your roster will be different just because of spending up for tight end.
One last guy, and I'm off Kelce in all formats this year. So, I'm going to be the Kelce hater just because this season, until he proves another.
Pat Mahomes doesn't throw to tight end.
He's never thrown to a tight end at any level of football.
It's true.
Didn't at Texas Tech, didn't in high school. He just doesn't throw to tight ends. Alex Smith, all he's done is throw to tight ends. So it's a huge downgrade for Travis Kelce. So the guy that I'm looking at is Evan Ingram at 4,700. So we know AJ Bouye, we know Jalen Ramsey as the corners. Typically, when there's an elite corner, Jalen Ramsey will actually cover that corner. The problem is Sterling Shepard and Odell Beckham, Bouye and Ramsey are likely going to cover those two, leaving Evan Ingram as the guy who they may throw to. So I wouldn't do it in cash, but as a GPP play, they're going to have to throw to somebody, and I think it'll be Ingram.
Nice. All right, guys, let's move on to defenses. We'll only spend a few minutes on this. We don't cover kickers anymore. Not really a big part of DFS. Thank goodness John is doing a fist pump. Yes. Okay. I'm not a fan of the kickers either. Good shift. All right.
That was close.
Yeah. You got to really draw that out. Shift. We know Joe listens really closely to these to watch all of us, and me especially. I'm a real potty mouth. Devin, speaking of potty mouths, tell me about defenses you like this week.
That's a good question. It's the one area that I'm really stumped at. So the team that I like is the Chargers, and it's simply because the talent doesn't match the price at 2,800 on DraftKings, and let me see their price on FanDuel. They're 4,300. So this is a team that Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa as the defensive ends. They have Casey Hayward on the outside. Patrick Mahomes is really making his second start in the NFL. He's a guy he's a gunslinger, Brett Favre type quarterback who could be prone to interceptions. I think the price for the Chargers is simply too cheap. And really, I mean, there's not a lot of defenses I like. My second defense is actually the Broncos, just because I think the Seahawks are an absolute train wreck of a team this year. We talked about Doug Baldwin. They have some offensive line issues, which we know against Denver is not necessarily a good thing. On the road in Denver, which is typically a tough place to play. So Denver and the Chargers are the two teams that I'm really looking at.
Right on. I think maybe the highest owned is going to be Baltimore Ravens. We mentioned at the top of the show against Peterman. Ryan, it sounds like you like them. Tell me more about that, and is there any others that you're looking at?
Yeah, it's tough to – well, the Ravens would be just on raw points, but they are the most expensive one as well. The other high end, if you're looking, is the Saints hosting Ryan Fitzpatrick and company. But spending down a little bit, and I think maybe even further down than the Chargers, the Patriots are at home, and they have a pretty solid defensive coach with a lot of time to plan for a team. I know it's a high total, but maybe some of that total is a defensive touchdown. Maybe there's a sack, a couple interceptions. I mean, Deshaun Watson, as good as he is still a pretty inexperienced quarterback. So, for 2,400 on DraftKings, which is, next to nothing, they're one that I'm looking at as well.
Yeah, and he is coming back from a pretty serious injury. I mean, I think he's going to have a solid game, but that's not a bad play especially for a GPP. John, who are you looking at for defense?
Well, I mean, in lieu of Jeff Pasquino not being able to be with us this season, he always brought up Matt Bryant every week as the kicker. Am I right in that? I kind of tuned that out.
That was me every week.
That was Devin.
Well, I wanted to mention Jeff.
Or Matt Bryant.
What the heck? So, in line with Matt Bryant's, How about the Jacksonville Jaguars?
Yeah.
Defense. We should be mentioning them every single week. This week they go up against a very, very bad offensive line. I think an offense that is similar to what Devin just described in Seattle. A lot of questions. So I think Jacksonville is in discussion, but they are 3,700, and maybe for an extra $100, you would just want to go to Baltimore playing at home against that same quarterback who threw 5 interceptions in one half last season. But from a, if you want to save salary, the defense I'm looking at is one that looked tremendous in the preseason, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals, 2,700 against Andrew Luck, an offensive line that is also struggling right now. They've got all sorts of injuries leading into week 1. I'm not a big fan of their receiving core. We've already talked about how bad their backfield is. They're mixing 2 small rookies into the starting rotation because of Marlon Mack's injury. So I think, if you want to save some salary this week, Cincinnati Bengals 2,700 is it's certainly a good option.
Wouldn't shock me if Andrew Luck threw multiple picks in that game.
One more. So FanDuel has changed their pricing on defense. We saw them do it a little bit at the end of last season. Typically, it was like 4,000 was the floor, so you would always play a top defense. They've actually lowered the floor to 3,000. So, for example, Baltimore's at 4,800. The Browns are at 3,000, and I'm not advocating for the Browns. The team that I'm advocating is the Miami Dolphins at 3,200. So there's a $1,600 savings if you want Baltimore versus Miami. I mean, I'll ask you guys who threw the most interceptions that's currently a starting quarterback from last season, and the answer is Marcus Mariota. So you're really – and he didn't look great in the preseason, so you're really betting against Marcus Mariota to continue that trend where he had interception problems, and ultimately he just didn't look great moving the ball last season. So it's on the – Miami's at home, which we typically like to see at 3,200. If you're just trying to punt the defense and hope, I mean, a lot of defense is who's going to score a touchdown in a GPP anyway. So, I think that they're a fine.
Fellow Football Guys staffer Daniel Simpkins just cried a slow tear. He's a Titans fan.
I mean, I didn't say anything that was not factual, so. Everything I said was factual, that he DeShone Kizer led the league in interceptions. He's no longer a starter. Marcus Mariota was second in interceptions last season.
That's a good fact. Let's talk about stacks, fellas. We've talked about it a little bit already, but I want to hear a little bit more about who you guys are playing for stacks. I think that it being week 1, there's going to be newer players playing in GPPs more so than later weeks. You're going to see a lot of expensive stacks, a lot of name brand stacks. So I'm wondering if you guys have some stacks that have a little bit lower ownership than those will be, or if you're like, whatever, I've got some big name stacks I like. So Ryan, tell me about the stacks you like this week.
All right. So only because you built it up and we didn't even plan this. Andy Dalton and John Ross. So we talked about Keelan Cole being cheap. John Ross is also cheap. It's $700 difference on DraftKings, but could be a reasonable pivot. Couple stats when I was researching for week 1 trend spotting here, I found Indy allowed an average depth of target of 9.0 yards last year, which was tied for 4th most in the league. And they had 53 deep completions against, which was 2nd most in the league. John Ross can run really fast. And so I think that they might throw to him deep. But also if you are more risk averse and want to play some cash games, some triple ups, some sort of league type of play, our David Dodds calls it a cash plus stack, where you put a quarterback in a very safe receiver. So Dalton and Green could be one for that too. And all those stats would still apply because AJ Green is also fast.
John, who do you got for your stacks this week?
Love the John Ross call. That's a guy that was on my radar as well. So good to hear we're aligned there. I had 2 stacks written down for the show. We've covered one of them. That was Fitzpatrick and Godwin at the low end at 4,100. And then Devin kind of took the other one, and that's Mahomes and Hill. They seem to have created a lot of chemistry in the preseason. So I like that as well, especially when Sammy Watkins is going to get shadow coverage on the opposite side of the field with Casey Hayward. So that kind of opens me up for, just kind of winging it. And, the team that I like this week in the air, Pittsburgh Steelers. We talked earlier in the show about the questions in the backfield. Last year, I think they ran the ball 14 times in week 1 against the Browns, and they threw the ball almost 40 times. And a lot of that was speculation. Is Tomlin trying to punish Le'Veon Bell? We could have a very similar thing play out this week where Roethlisberger is just throwing the ball. And I think he's calling his own plays. Is that correct, Ryan? Is he calling his own plays with the departure of Todd Haley this year?
I mean, not to the degree that Peyton Manning in his prime did, but they're giving him a little more freedom.
Is that a good thing?
Well, I mean, for Roethlisberger,
his IQ is like 40.
Oh no! Went to the IQ.
But he is a really good no-huddle quarterback. And as I alluded to previously in the show, when Mike Tomlin doesn't allow him to no-huddle, he gets in no rhythm whatsoever.
Well, I guess my point is that, if you give him the choice to hand the ball off or throw the ball, my suspicion is that he wants to throw it. And, oh, by the way, he's got 3 receivers who are giant this year. Antonio Brown's uncomfortable. So we'll not even talk about his size. But then you've got Juju Smith-Schuster and Justin Hunter, who respectively have 4 and 5 inch advantages over their respective coverage backs on the Browns. So I really like Roethlisberger paired up with those guys this week. You can mix and match any way you want. Obviously, the preference goes to the receivers that are going to see the ball, and that's Brown and Schuster.
Devin, I'm off Schuster, by the way.
Yeah, I mean he's only 5,900 on DK.
He's going to get Denzel Ward, who I think is going to have a breakout year this year. So he's the one guy that I'm off for. And Denzel Ward's the one guy who's fast enough in Cleveland to keep up with Juju. So I think Antonio Brown is the clear play.
I've got him on Buddy Calhoun, by the way. Denzel Ward I have as Justin Hunter, but maybe that's something we need to look at over the course of the week.
Yeah, I think we look at it. Buddy Calhoun typically is a slot corner, but Ward at Ohio State played in the slot, and they've played him a little bit in the preseason there too. So I think they'll move him inside. But if he's not, he would have an advantage over Buddy Calhoun.
Gotcha. Tell me, Devin, about stacks.
Stack, I like Case Keenum and Emmanuel Sanders. So no one's going to be on this. And Emmanuel Sanders has had a pretty good preseason, a lot of connections with Keenum. The talks out of camp have been that these two are performing pretty well. And we've seen what Keenum did with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. He made them relevant. So going against the Seattle team that I just don't believe in at all, it's a stack that no one is going to have, and I think it could pay off this week. The last stack, this is just to go against Keelan Cole, but Blake Bortles and Dede Westbrook. I think that no one's going to have that either, and we all assume that it's going to be Keelan Cole. Remember that Dede Westbrook would have been a first-round pick if he didn't have some off-the-field issues. So he's very talented. Didn't perform a lot last year, but I think that he could take a step forward, even though we just haven't seen it. Similar to John Ross in that both are extremely talented, and it's more speculation than anything else. So those are the two that are kind of off the wall. We've mentioned a lot of stacks on this show already, but those are what I'm looking at.
Yeah, I like that those will have some low ownership. I think that in week 1, you can take some stabs like that to a certain percentage of your GPP entries and roll with that. Let's do parting thoughts, fellas. Words of wisdom, last thoughts that might be unique to week 1 and your approach to that. John, tell us, what are your parting thoughts for week 1?
I don't have a whole lot to add. We've touched on a lot of things, but I guess this is an appropriate spot for me to talk about some of the things that I myself am doing this year. I have, we had our show that you were also on, the Roto Grinders, or the Football Guys Fantasy Hour, hosted by Roto Grinders, lasted 3 years, 50 episodes, but we had to say happy trails. And this season, I'll be doing a short weekly segment that will appear, I believe, on Thursdays. So keep your eye out for that. It'll be hosted on both sites. And then, of course, tips and picks will continue to appear on Saturday afternoons generally. And those always go there for my most up-to-date thoughts, because later in the week, everything is a little more formed than it is, especially on a Monday, as it is here on week one. Outside of that, I'm happy to be back. I'm so happy football's here.
Yeah, exactly. And John also posts our Vegas value charts early in the week and maintains those throughout the week. So if you want to know what Vegas is saying about the week, be sure to check that out. Ryan, he's got the trend spotting article that he does each week. He mentioned it a little bit earlier, where he recognizes trends that could uncover DFS gems. So Ryan, what is your parting thoughts for this week?
Yeah, so I kind of alluded to it earlier. Let's just maybe pump the brakes a little in week one. Let's dip our toes in the pool, not jump in belly flop style. Let's get a data point, right? So we, you mentioned trend spotting. So did I. It generally, trend spotting really hits its stride, sometime in mid-October, when we have a couple weeks of data to look at. I focus on usage for players and seeing who's getting more snaps, who's getting more targets, who's getting more touches. So it's just hard to know that right now. As to who's going to get them all. And even whoever gets them all in week one or the lion's share, they may not get those in week two. It could be game plan specific. And then also I picked up another assignment this year. I'll be doing, for our Football Guys season long side of the house, a QB streaming article, rent a quarterback, similar to Sigmund Bloom's Rent a Defense that he's done for years and years. And I look forward to that, because that'll also help us here. I'm going to be looking at quarterbacks under 60% owned in season long leagues. So that'll really be like kind of our cheap quarterback corner here that we spent some time on here tonight, which we tend to do every week anyway. So looking forward to that. So please check that out if you are also a subscriber on the season long side.
Yep. And Devin is heavily involved in our matchup write-ups. So be sure to take a look at the in-depth work that he does with a couple of our other staffers each week. Devin, what are your parting thoughts for this week?
Yeah, a couple things, and I think my internet is going out, unfortunately. So one thing I want to announce is that we're actually having college football back this year. So I know John and Dan
And his internet went out.
Yeah.
There you are. Welcome back.
Yeah, sorry about that. So John Lee and Dan Hendry both hit for $10,000 plus in week one. So it's included entirely free. So check it out. And it's free with the DFS subscription, I should clarify. Not free, but and like you mentioned, the rushing and passing matchups, which we spend a ridiculous amount of time on trying to get you ready for who has the best matchup. So if it looks like I have bags under my eyes, it's because I haven't really slept in like a month.
Yeah, when they announced college football on FanDuel and DraftKings, Devin kicked it into another gear that he didn't know he had, I believe, because he's our college football expert. So, yeah, we've sort of rolled that. I broke
my internet using it so much.
Yes, exactly. His internet is tired as well, and that's why it's a little bit jumpy today. So check all that out over at footballguys.com/DFS. Like Devin said, pay for a DFS package, and you also get college football and NFL all together for that one price. It's not like we separated it out or jacked up the price or anything like that. That's all we got. Thanks for joining us on our week one Power Grid. Definitely check out that FanDuel offer that I mentioned earlier in the show over at fanduel.com/FBG. And if you're looking for one of our subscriptions, you probably want the Daily Fantasy Pro subscription if you're listening to this show. That's all of our DFS content. So look for our week 2 episode launching on Friday morning, September 14th. We're going to usually record these on Thursday nights and release them on Friday mornings. That's all we got. So on behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee, saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.